Welcome back. And here we are at the very end of Nature Day. It's been a really interesting and enriching day, and I'm sad that it's coming to an end, but it's going out with a boom. So we're starting with our last session, which is actually a call to action, building water and climate resilience through nature-based solutions. And so I'm going to pass the floor to our moderator for the session, Naabia Ofosu-Amaah, who's Senior Corporate Engagement Advisor at the Nature Conservancy. Naabia, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us today. As mentioned, my name is Naabia Ofosu-Amaah, and I'm a Senior Corporate Engagement Advisor focused on global water security at the Nature Conservancy, based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And on behalf of the session hosts, the Nature Conservancy, the Pacific Institute, and the UN Global Compact CEO Water Mandate, we are honored to be here to be part of the Water Pavilion at COP26 and would like to welcome you to this session titled A Call to Action, Building Water and Climate Resilience Through Nature-Based Solutions. This event brings together key stakeholders from the public, private, and NGO sectors who are interested in advancing nature-based solutions, or NBS, as they may be referred to throughout this session. Our discussions will center on the challenges and opportunities for mitigation and adaptation that exist in addressing the water-climate nexus, as well as considerations of biodiversity and the environment. Through this session, we're hoping to bring approaches like nature-based solutions and resilience thinking to the foreground to help build the business case for investments in water and climate solutions. As we've heard so far this week here at the Water Pavilion, climate impacts are often felt through water. Too much water, too little water, or polluted water. And water, as the blue thread that connects all ecosystems and sustains all life on Earth, is the foundation for sustainable development. Building climate resilient and thriving communities, ecosystems, and economies is only possible with clean, reliable, and accessible water resources and healthy freshwater systems. And building water resilience is also therefore crucial to climate justice. In line with the objectives of this Water Pavilion, we hope to demonstrate the role of water in meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement and supporting ambitious and science-based climate action. This multi-sectoral event will also help to create a unified front for the water community, inspiring widespread partner involvement. This session aims to help participants understand opportunities and challenges of investing in nature-based solutions, build collective action, and forge alliances between sectors that is much needed to address our water and climate challenges at scale, breaking down barriers and silos between these sectors, and finally, a call to action for key stakeholders to upscale and mainstream NBS. So before we dive into our action-filled session today, I will introduce our esteemed speakers and panelists. We have 6 panelists across sectors who will be contributing to our discussion. Starting with the public sector, we welcome Todd Bridges, who is the U.S. Army's Senior Research Scientist for Environmental Science. He leads research and technology application in the areas of sustainable infrastructure and environmental management for the U.S. Army and the Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE. Todd is the national lead for the USACE Engineering with Nature initiative, which began in 2010 to advance the use of nature-based solutions. For the public sector, we also welcome Tamsin Faragher, who is the acting director of the Resilience Department for the City of Cape Town, South Africa. Tamsin Faragher is a landscape architect and built environment specialist with experience both locally and internationally. She has worked across disciplines in the private and public sector, including planning, design, implementation, infrastructure planning, environmental planning, and policy. Recent work areas have included extensive policy work around the application and limitations of non-potable water use, and more recently, research into groundwater governance and management within Cape Town. From the private sector, we have Stacey Tank, who is currently the Chief Transformation Officer at Heineken, based in Amsterdam. As a direct report to the CEO and member of the executive committee, Tank shepherds the company's new growth strategy, Evergreen. In addition, Tank is responsible for the company's stepped-up sustainability and ESG vision, Brew a Better World 2030. Tank formerly led the multi-billion dollar Home Depot installation services and Home Depot measurement services businesses for the Home Depot, the world's largest home improvement retailer. Also from the private sector, we have Heather Tansey, who has more than 20 years of experience in the sustainability field and serves as Cargill's Vice President for Environmental Sustainability. Heather is responsible for developing and executing Cargill's corporate strategies in climate, land use, regenerative agriculture, water, and sustainable operations for Cargill globally. Before assuming her current role, Heather led sustainability for Cargill's protein and animal nutrition businesses and also served in several sustainability roles at 3M. And now moving to the NGO sector, we welcome Jan Kasson, who is the director of the Water Initiative at Forest Trends. Jan is an ecologist with experience in terrestrial, marine, and freshwater systems. Her career has emphasized applied research and practice in a wide range of water resource management issues. Jan directs Forest Trends' work on investments in watershed services. She has also worked with Forest Trends' Business and Biodiversity Offset Program to support and promote the use of best practices in biodiversity offsets and biodiversity conservation around the world. Prior to joining Forest Trends, Jan worked as a senior project manager and ecologist for a Seattle-based engineering and environmental consulting firm, and as a biologist for the Nature Conservancy. And also from the private sector, we have Jason Morrison, who joined the Pacific Institute in 1993 and became its president in October 2016. As president, he oversees the Institute and its activities, focusing on broadening and amplifying the organization's reach and impact. Additionally, Jason serves as the head of the CEO Water Mandate, an initiative of the United Nations Global Compact, and has supported the initiative since 2008 with applied research, event organization, and other services. He is also a co-founder of the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So those are our 6 panelists across 3 sectors who will be contributing to our discussion a bit later on. But first, to provide our scene-setting presentation, I'd now like to introduce Torgny Holmgrem, who became the Stockholm International Water Institute's executive director in 2012. Before joining SIWI, Torgny worked with the World Bank and the Swedish Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Finance. He has recently served as a Sherpa in UN Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability. He has served as an expert and board member on the World Economic Forum, Global Agenda Council on Water, the World Water Council, the European Advisory Group of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and with WaterAid in Sweden. So I'll now hand it over to Torgny for the scene-setting presentation.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for initiating this important conversation tonight. As we all know, interest in nature-based solutions is growing, which of course is very encouraging. We really need new investments in NBS to tackle the climate crisis effectively, but there are still many obstacles to overcome before NBS are used to their full potential, and I welcome this opportunity to discuss this with you tonight. So I will share with you some 6 points that I will make stress to see what we need to do to further and improve and invest more in NBS, built on research that we undertaken in Syria. To my help, I have some slides, and here we go. Number 1 is join the growing movement for nature-based solutions. That is what I heard these days in Glasgow so far. And it's easy to forget that NBS is indeed growing when we have not seen that many investments so far. We were reminded this in a session this Monday when a colleague of mine, David Herbert Coleman, analyzed the different iterations of the country's nationally determined contributions, NDCs, where in the first round there were some NDCs that mentioned nature-based solutions, but they are coming on bid front right now. At CEVI, we have noticed that also in the World Water Week that we do arrange every year. So nature-based solutions has become a popular topic, especially since 2018, when the conference theme in Stockholm was linking water and ecosystems. But we need more countries, companies, and citizens to join this growing movement for nature-based solutions. we must also acknowledge that it is so far sometimes been difficult to go from words to actions. And this is sometimes something we heard repeatedly. We haven't seen that fast roll out of NBSs that we would like to see. And why is that? I go to my second topic, and that invest now to build momentum. First, countries and investors must understand the potential of nature-based solutions. There is a growing body of research that shows that absolutely crucial role that nature can play and has to play for greenhouse gas sequestration. Nature might be able to help with 1/3 of the greenhouse gas reductions needed by 2030. But we cannot afford to waste this opportunity, and we cannot take nature's ability to store carbon for granted. There are now worrying signs that this ability appears to be, thinking or weakening, as reported by the IPCC in August. So against this background, it is surprising that nature-based solutions are still only getting a modest, tiny share of global finance, or climate finance, I will claim. Around 3% is some records that we have received. Instead, the protection of ecosystem often relies on solely either on public funding or philanthropies, both of which have also suffered, of course, during COVID-19. But to strengthen the climate action, countries and communities need to work more together and proactively, I think, with nature-based solutions. And according to the Global Commission and Global Center for Adaptation, the return on investments ratio could be as high as 3-1 if countries prioritize water-related strategies to build resilience. To me, it's a very important part is to attract funding. There is no lack of funding or funds, liquidity in the world. There are trillions of dollars, but I think we haven't been managed so far to attract the funding. That is the potential we have with NBS. So, let no research influence policymaking. That is my third point. Well, this shows that climate action can be much more effective if it's influenced by new research on, for example, the role of nature and water for nature, we say. And currently this is not happening to the extent we would like to see. In an op-ed last Saturday in the mainly daily newspaper in Sweden, I, together with Johan Rockström of the Potsdam Institute and Ulrika Moderator from UNDP and Line Gordon heading the Stockholm Resilience Center, we claim that decision makers are not aware of the possibilities that nature-based solutions will carry. And that risks to be a mismatch of funding investment when you're not looking into the possibility that nature could provide us. I often quote the current head of UNEP, Inger Andersen. She claims that we need to have a new compact with nature. I think that is really what we need. So science is evolving very fast when it comes to understanding nature's role in climate action. And we also today have a much better understanding, just a few years ago, of which ecosystems that are hotspots on the verge of becoming carbon emitters rather than carbon sinks or carbon sequestration. And that is a dangerous path we're on to. So parts of the Amazonas, for example, are on the verge of being carbon emitters rather than carbon sink or carbon sequestration. And if that happens on a grand scale and a global scale, it will become significantly more difficult to keep the global temperature under 1.5 degrees of centigrade. So this must be a key issue of future climate policy. And here I really want to emphasize that nature-based solutions must never be used as an excuse for inaction. We still, of course, need technical innovation, economic incentives, and behavioral change as well. And my point so far is that the political discourse has been disproportionately focused on technological solutions rather than nature, even when nature is already providing the benefits that we are trying to innovate new solutions around. That brings me to my first statement. Prioritize solutions that combine adaptation and mitigation. And to some extent, to a large extent, we claim that low-income countries have a more nuanced approach to what climate action is, because they incorporate adaptation and mitigation, don't have that sharp division line maybe that we have in the Northern Hemisphere. We are really not prioritizing adaptation. Well, this year, or maybe the most recent years, we have floods and droughts in our part of the world as well. So I think that is coming to a change. Nature-based solutions are a great way to find a more balanced approach that we heard more and more about during this COP so far. Healthy wetlands can act as flood and drought defense for villages as well as for megacities. Forests can recharge and clean water, and they give food and livelihoods. Agriculture yields can be secured through improved management of land and water. At the same time, the very same solution can also strengthen nature's ability to sequester carbon. Nature-based solutions therefore tend to blur the traditional distinction between climate mitigation and adaptation. Number 5, create holistic solutions and new governance structures. I already mentioned about the lack of finance or the lack of having the business case provided for investors. And this is closely linked to a lack of sound incentives, I think, that the industry and many people experience, and that we have heard many testimonials about during these days and also earlier water conferences. Even companies that are interested in nature-based solutions can find it hard to create a sustainable business case, partly because of red tape or lack of regulations inertia. It is still common that development projects do not take ecosystem services into account, and decision-making is so often fragmented that it stops initiatives that would have been in everybody's interest. Well, we work to identify and develop solutions to come around these problems, and one of them is the Source to Sea project that we are running, a platform where we link what happens upstream and downstream, because we know the problems in the oceans are mainly land-based, and that is something that we discussed earlier in the discussion here today. The critical point here is to realize the full potential of nature's ability and role in climate mitigation and adaptation. My final part is new knowledge opens for systemic change. We need to talk much more about how we overcome this type of governance problems, but there is also a need for more research on nature-based solutions, especially the role in climate mitigation. And CW, we are conducting such a research right now, together with the Potsdam Institute I just mentioned about, but also with Stockholm Resilience Center and UNEP, and we hope to be able to table a report come this spring about NBS and climate mitigation efforts. So, finally, we need more knowledge on how to best work with nature-based solutions, because we know that they are absolutely fundamental for both climate mitigation and adaptation. So I very much look forward to discussion in this session and here in Glasgow in the upcoming days. So thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. That really helped us to set the scene for what we're going to be talking through today. And we'll now be moving into our panel discussion. So I'll ask all who are joining virtually if you could turn on your videos so that we can see everyone. And then we have our participants who are joining us there in Glasgow as well. So in this panel discussion, we're really focusing on how stakeholders from different sectors, the public, private, and NGO sectors, are advancing NBS and the challenges and opportunities that exist in addressing this water and climate nexus. So we have two key questions that we would like to hear from all of the panelists during our time together. There are 6 panelists that we have, so quite a bit to get through. But I will begin with our team that's there in Glasgow, starting with Stacey, with our first question. What are the roles and responsibilities of your sector in furthering the NBS agenda?
Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, and great to be with all of you. I think the responsibility we have as brewers, simply put, if there's no water, there's no beer. From the beginning of the origins 157 years ago of Heineken as a small brewer in the Netherlands, we knew that water was an absolutely critical part of how we would be able to brew and hopefully delight our customers. So for a long time, we've been thinking about concepts like water efficiency. But of course, as time went on from the 90s, when we were first leaning into some of these topics, concepts like nature-based solutions have become increasingly compelling. And we know that also because of climate change, we see that there's water scarcity and more water scarce sites now, numbering in the dozens, where we had simply a handful just a few years ago. So there are efforts, and I love the spirit of collaboration because, of course, none of us can solve this on our own, but we work together with governments, NGOs, other companies. And for example, in our business in Indonesia, we saw that because of industrialization, population deforestation, the water environment was struggling. And so we worked together with all of those entities. We all put money into the center, and we were able to lean into projects that were restoring the watersheds through reforestation, leaning into bamboo specifically, because bamboo was helping not only to sequester carbon, but also to hold back some pollution that was getting into the rivers. So the rivers were able to restore themselves. And of course, through that, you create local jobs, et cetera. All of that blossomed since 2014 into partnerships with dozens of organizations, and now is the Indonesia Water Coalition, where we work together over the long run to take an end-to-end approach to supporting the local watersheds. So we know as a 157-year-old company, we can only thrive if these communities thrive, and we have a huge role to play.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacey. So over to Todd, same question, roles and responsibilities of your sector in furthering the NBS agenda.
Can I do a sound check? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. Well, in the infrastructure sector, as a public agency, I think our responsibilities and abilities to move nature-based solutions forward really in three areas. And one is a commitment to innovation. It was mentioned by the speaker. We've really completed 100 years of what I might call the modern age of engineering, and infrastructure solutions took largely the form of projects built with concrete and rock and steel. And I think for the 21st century, engineers must figure out how to innovate in the form of combining conventional engineering with nature itself. It's an absolute imperative. The second point is, and I think on that point, within the Army Corps of Engineers in the United States, we're a 200-plus-year-old infrastructure agency. We have an engineering with nature program that's designed to, facilitate that kind of innovation. Second point is working across organizational boundaries. This is really important for government agencies where we have our specific set of mandates that we work with. We have to figure out how to develop synergy across organizational boundaries within government, and then also with the private sector. And that's going to require its own level of social innovation, if you will. And then the third point is, especially within government, we have to find a new, deeper way to engage with communities and understand what communities' needs are, including social equity, as well as other forms of value that can be created beyond the economic drivers, which have been so important to development of infrastructure. So those are my 3 points.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd. I'm hearing some themes with what Stacey said around coalitions, et cetera, and needing to work across sectors. So thank you for noting that. And we'll now move over to Tamsin on roles and responsibility of your sector in furthering NBS.
Great, thank you. So to start off with, I think it's important to recognise that South Africa's water governance separates water services and water resource management. And so using this as a starting point, it follows that natural and urban water systems are seen and managed separately. And because nature-based solutions are associated with water resource management, they haven't really gained much traction in the Department of Water and Sanitation, where engineering approaches still dominate, as Tom mentioned. But the drought has shifted these boundaries, and the City of Cape Town's water strategy that was launched after the drought ambitiously guides the city's work towards becoming a water-sensitive city by 2040, making this shift very visible. In practical terms, the city will actively facilitate Cape Town's transition over time into a water-sensitive city using diverse water resources and infrastructure to become a city that makes optimal use of stormwater and urban waterways, livable urban waterways, for the purpose of flood control, aquifer recharge, water reuse, and recreation, all based on, and here's the hook, sound ecological principles. Our responsibility is therefore, as the local government, to put programs and projects together that reflect this vision and actively weave water back into nature, connecting the natural and urban water systems to create a hybrid water system of blue, green, and grey infrastructure. So in this way, we can move towards conjunctive, truly integrated water management at multiple scales, where all water is treated as precious. And in this way, we can build redundancy, adaptability, flexibility, which ultimately constructs resilience, climate adaptation, and mitigation. So as local government, we can push the nature-based solutions agenda by firstly recognizing that water resource management is not an engineering exercise. Water is part of the environment. Its management should be led by an environmental agenda by a transversal team that includes citizens and private sector to nurture nature's web for water outcomes amongst many other outcomes. Secondly, we need to recognize that the city has many mandates that may not be titled water resource management, but that effectively contribute towards it, either positively or negatively. So we as a city need to reframe our assets and infrastructure as ecological infrastructure that includes water elements. Thirdly, and lastly, the City of Cape Town has a special responsibility to share our story and lessons to assist other cities to recognize the risk, so that they are informed and inspired, importantly, to urgently seek ways to build water resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. So I'll now go to Jan with that question, and then we'll go back to our colleagues in Glasgow. So over to you, Jan.
Thank you. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, I see two important roles and one primary responsibility for NGOs in scaling nature-based solutions. First, NGOs have a role to play as a bridge or as connective tissue that helps bring together many of the essential elements for scaling nature-based solutions. For example, bridging across science, policy, and practice in a way that ensures that science and policy are informed by practice and directly support practice on the ground. Also, bringing together different sectors and connecting sectors, agriculture, water, and energy through collective action efforts, leveraging the multifunctional aspects of nature-based solutions that can help align actions across sectors and enable cross-sectoral outcomes at a landscape scale. Second, NGOs are well placed to foster bottom-up and co-development initiatives that lead to more sustainable nature-based solutions. For example, emphasizing the importance of and supporting local knowledge and local action, especially supporting Indigenous peoples, and recognizing the important role that local leaders and innovators have played in spurring national and international action on nature-based solutions. NGOs have also played a significant role in co-developing with users and stakeholders the supporting evidence and tools and skills for scaling nature-based solutions, and doing this from the ground up, really supporting real place-based needs in terms of skills and knowledge and evidence to plan, design, and implement nature-based solutions. And finally, in terms of responsibility, I think a critical responsibility of NGOs is to ensure the integrity, clarity, and rigor around nature-based solution science and practice. This involves insisting on high standards for programs and projects, but also being very clear about what outcomes nature-based solutions can and cannot deliver, and promoting best practices through principles and guidance for nature-based solutions that are effective, equitable, and resilient. Thanks.
Dan, so over to Jason. Same question to you. What are the roles and responsibilities of your sector in furthering the NBS agenda?
Great, thank you. I will build off of Jan's great points. In fact, they were very aligned with many of the observations I would make. The NGO community is diverse, it's an ecosystem, and it's not monolithic, but some of the key roles, I think, are around the thought leadership and the assistance on tools development or the leading practice decision support frameworks that can allow the efforts to scale. It's sometimes the partner who can help with the technical expertise through the actual project work. And if done well, I think the NGO community can play a great role in that convening function at the local level and the engagement of key stakeholders. And lastly, I would say that counterintuitive or perhaps counter to the other roles, NGOs can play an important watchdog role in ensuring high integrity nature-based solution projects. I don't know if people saw the sign-on letter that was just recently floated around COP by 250 plus NGOs globally that are speaking out against nature-based solutions, partly because of the concern around the offsetting of paper credits of carbon, but also about the displacement of forest-dependent communities and indigenous communities. And so I think the degree to which NGOs can play a role in making sure that on-the-ground work is really engaging those communities, as Todd mentioned, it's a really positive role, and a neutral arbiter can help in that regard.
Thank you, Jason. And finally, over to Heather.
Can you? Okay, thank you. So when I think about this from a Cargill perspective, it's really quite similar to what Stacy said at Heineken. You know, that health of water in our ecosystems is inextricably linked to the success of our business. If we don't have good quality water available, the agricultural sector isn't going to thrive. When you think about it, 70% of the fresh water used globally is used by agriculture. So we really have a responsibility to be stewards of that water. And at Cargill, we see agriculture as really being a solution to it. We think the way we operate agriculture can drive benefits in that. And that's why we as a company have set goals to drive our progress and our strategy around water. And we're thinking about these goals very holistically, right? So we're leaning into an approach that looks not just at the use in our own facilities, but that's clearly a focus, but also looking at what we can do in our supply chains. Because when we look at our overall footprint for water at Cargill, most of that water use happens outside of our four walls and up our supply chain. But we can play a really critical role in connecting those farmers and producers that are using water in the agricultural space down through to retailers and consumers that are using those products. So that's why we're looking at, or why we've set goals specifically around both water quality as well as water use in our supply chain. So we're looking at reducing 600 billion liters of water, or restoring that water in our supply chain. We're working on reducing 5 million kilograms of effluents and pollution into water systems. And then finally, the third piece of that holistic puzzle is thinking about water access, right? In the communities where we operate, we want to make sure that the citizens of those communities have access to potable water for drinking, for hygiene. And so that's another strong focus of our program, is really understanding and taking that place-based approach to saying, where are we operating in areas where there are those challenges, and how can we come in and address them?
Thank you so much, Heather. So really a lot of interesting information that you all shared in that first question, and seeing some themes across what we've heard and what the different sectors can do. So for the private sector, companies being dependent on water, having a real incentive to invest, and therefore playing a catalytic role oftentimes, and seeing opportunities for innovation. And then in the public sector, helping to think about how to combine traditional engineering with nature, and viewing water resources as ecological infrastructure for the different communities that they're serving. And then finally, for the NGO sector, playing a convening role, supporting with tools, evidence, and also serving as a watchdog and ensuring the integrity of nature-based solutions. So thanks for those insights, and we'll now move to our second question here. So we will start with Stacy, moving to how do we scale up investments in NBS?
Thank you. Yeah, so earlier this year, we were reflecting on our own yardstick for success. We have a value creation model we used to call at Heineken the golden triangle. It had top-line growth, efficient capital allocation, and profit. But something was missing very clearly, and that was operating sustainably and responsibly and putting that on equal footing with those other elements. So if we don't say yes to the others and yes, it's sustainable and responsible, then we shouldn't do it. We formalize that in our value creation model, and now we're looking at tying all the ways that we operate to that, what we call green diamond. What that means is that we also ring fence and defend a meaningful amount of capital every year, and this year for the first time very formally, to make sure that we're funding all kinds of projects to make sure we're a good contributor to the communities in which we operate. And a lot of that has to do with projects like the one in Indonesia, or another project that we were just chatting about in Monterrey, Mexico, that comes to mind because we were operating in a watershed again because of deforestation, because of population growth, et cetera, that was really suffering. We worked together with 30, 40 other organizations and NGOs. Actually, originally, the project was designed with the Nature Conservancy guiding us based on their expertise and their objectivity. We worked together with the FEMSA Foundation and others to create the Monterrey Metropolitan Water Fund. And that fund leaned into the reforestation of 1,200 hectares of land. They're currently working on 300 more, planted 1.2 million new trees, but local seeds, and driving local employment for community members to go out and find local varietals to plant them to regenerate the land. So we have to start with what we can contribute directly, and we have to put the money where the intention is, and make sure that no matter what, we defend that funding. And then together with other big multinationals, with public funders as well, we can make a huge impact. And then I love the point that was made about capturing what we've done so that we can share it, so that we can get better, so that we can learn from it, so NGOs can help us get better to be objective and push us to achieve even more the next time.
Great, thank you so much. Jan, you're up next. How do we scale up investments in NBS?
All right. Yeah, I agree. We need really robust investments in nature-based solutions, but I would argue that it's not always about the funding and financing. Besides robust investments, we really need at the same time to create the scaffolding that enables investments to really be mobilized and implemented effectively. And I'll just give an example from work that we've been doing in Peru. Several years ago, the government of Peru created really ambitious national policies that resulted in very robust funding allocations, hundreds of millions of dollars for nature-based solutions for water security and climate resilience. However, it's been a challenge to really mobilize these funds. For example, in 2018, only about half of the allocated funds had actually been executed. And we and others found that there are a number of barriers to moving from this political will and funds that are sitting in accounts to actually executing projects. For example, the public investment project process was designed for gray infrastructure and is not really easily adapted to nature-based solutions projects. So procurement processes and contracting processes had to be adapted to allow them to be used with nature-based solutions. There's also a significant capacity gap in terms of workforce for designing, implementing, evaluating, and funding nature-based solutions across all levels in government agencies and communities, and as well as in the private sector. And then there was a lack of practical tools, just really simple tools like rapid assessment methods for identifying and prioritizing opportunities in specific watersheds, or guidance on design of individual nature-based solutions interventions. So, for example, high altitude wetland restoration practices, or the rehabilitation of ancestral pre-Incan managed aquifer recharge technology. So really, by systematically addressing a number of these barriers at the same time, Peru's been able to move what was about $4 million of investments in 2018 to over 200 million project-ready approvals in 2021. So I think in addition to really robust private and public sector financing, we really need the surrounding structure of enabling conditions that allow scaling of actual investments and moving money to projects on the ground.
Thanks. We'll now move back to Glasgow, starting with Heather and then Jason.
I think one of the most powerful tools that we can use in scaling nature-based solutions is really thinking about stacked benefits. So as we approach putting projects into place in our agricultural supply chains, we're looking for opportunities where we can focus on water projects that also yield carbon benefits and benefits to the businesses of the farmers and the producers that are implementing those practices. And we find when you can focus in on that triad together, you really have a powerful, compelling story, because in that case, both the environment and our ecosystems are winning as well as the producers. And so regenerative ag is a great example of this. So as they implement regenerative ag, those producers may need some assistance, right, to get over some of the initial startup costs. But what we have found is that the benefits back to their business are so great because of the increased soil health and the benefits there. So as they see good returns for their businesses, they're going to be willing to invest more and share their success with their friends and neighbors. And we found that we're able to go in and do projects with a select number of producers, have them see the benefits of that soil health enhancement, and then use them as spokespersons to really go out and share the success in their communities. And that's really helped us to start to scale these practices more broadly. So I really think focusing in on those benefits where you look at both water, climate, and farmer livelihoods.
My points will build first off of yours, Heather, and then Jan's, actually. So the lack of an agreed upon way of assessing these co-benefits associated with NBS investment is preventing the scale up and uptake, we believe. And we've been doing some work with a number of partner organizations to try to systematize how you can think about co-benefits, but also eventually to quantify and then monetize them. And then once you can do that, you strengthen the business case or the investment case for stakeholders to put real funding on the table. But the second point then is to Jan's, that I think there is what you might call institutional inertia from those in large institutions that have done things a certain way when it comes to investing in infrastructure. And being able to figure out where those choke points are, or those procedural and administrative hurdles that will allow consideration or even scoping into consideration these investments in NBS and then getting over the line to actually fund them is going to require collaboration across organizations with leading organizations, whether they be NGOs or others, that can help address some of those obstacles and technical complexities in order to be able to get these larger institutions to shift towards more investment in NBS.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So Tamsin, same question to you. How do we scale up investments in NBS?
Oh, yeah. How do we scale up? I think we scale up by crowding in. So, I mean, as local government, we have a significant role because, you know, the moment rain falls from the sky, it hits the surface in an urban environment and is interacting with some element of the city. So how we guide new development and manage existing infrastructure development is powerful for leveraging change on the ground. And it certainly is somewhere that we could be definitely making some progress. So local governments can and must drive others because every rand spent in development or infrastructure could be an investment in nature-based solutions. But we also need to show leadership and walk the talk by leveraging our own projects and using nature-based solutions through our procurement, as well as in also partnering with developers and professional practitioners who have a significant, though largely unrecognized role in implementing nature-based solutions. And one of the projects we're working on at present is a livable urban waterways project that's looking at capturing basement water and treating it in a public space using bioremediation and phytoremediation. And in this example, I mean, public space is driving water infrastructure, which is super exciting. And that water will hopefully be used for irrigation and non-potable purposes. And part of the exciting kind of spin-off of this work has been looking at different ways of financing it. And we've just started work with the World Bank to explore what kind of land value capture opportunities there may be, and then using this as a pilot to prove concept and then scale up for other projects. So getting this right, we need a shift, however, in the perception that landscapes and nature-based solutions are nice to have towards a recognition that they are the sites of hard work. And I think this project is going to be a great way of illustrating that. And this will then also help to reframe dominant perceptions around the need for grey infrastructure. But practically urban planners, urban designers, architects, engineers, and landscape architects are often sidelined or drawn into projects too late to really have an impact, will need new ways of working together. Local government can help this shift through their procurement, but also through research and financial modelling, as mentioned by the other speakers, because there is nothing more compelling than a business case. Our water strategy outlines some of the financial modelling that compares the costs of various water source treatments. And in 2019, when the strategy was adopted, alien invasive plant removal cost between 1 and 2 rands per litre compared to 9 rands for desalination. And just as a comparison, 1 pound is worth today around 20 rand and 50 cents. It's staggering what the numbers stack up to be. And that's not even including the additional benefits of, biodiversity and carbon sinks, etc. So these types of analyses are important tools for influencing budget decisions and mainstreaming business unusual rather than business as usual. And then lastly, local governments have to recognize that we can't do it on our own. As a number of other speakers have also highlighted, we have to seek out partners in the private sector and mobilize our communities to actively participate so as to crowd investment in. We need to take up a more active role of facilitation and enablement and make it possible for greater and wider participation in solving climate change's wicked problems. And everyone needs to feel that they have a role, because many small interventions, I believe, have the potential for big impact. Thank you.
Hey, Tamsin and Todd, how do we scale up investments in NBS?
I think everybody has touched on this point. I say the key is developing and sharing evidence for value through nature-based solutions. And beyond that, I would say the proof is in the doing. And I think there are 2 parts to this, that organizations that want to lead and can lead will have to join with other organizations, because it's a collaborative enterprise that's developing the evidence of value to demonstrate that. And that means that these organizations will have to grant themselves license or permission to try new things. Maybe I can use the word experiment. There are going to be certain risks with that. But that's how we're going to demonstrate, and develop the proof of evidence and value. And that includes the diversified value that's already been touched on many times. And then when organizations cooperating to do that, they have to commit to sharing widely what they learned and the successes and the obstacles and the challenges in demonstrating that value. And by sharing widely, I mean they need to be able to communicate these value propositions and evidence at the political level, at the community level, and at the practitioner level. And those are different channels those are groups that need different kinds of information communicated in different ways. But it's really all about value. And I think there's a lot that can be achieved. A lot is being achieved now through such partnerships like between the Army Corps of Engineers and the Nature Conservancy. There are many stories I could relate just on in terms of what we're doing together.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd. And thank you to all of the panelists for being so efficient in your responses. We have some more time to go a bit more deeper into this question. So a lot of you have mentioned, financing, bringing in those investments as opportunities of how we can scale this up. There is also that comment around the enabling conditions needed to support that, opportunities to work across sectors, et cetera. So I'm interested to hear if there are examples that we can share with all of our participants of specific types of projects, specific types of NBS that we've seen bringing in kind of the most funding to date that we think could be potential to move forward. So I'll open that up to any of the panelists who have additional cases that you'd like to share where you've seen success in this space. I see people thinking. I will say, Todd, I know you had some examples that you wanted to share. And then I also...
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Todd.
I guess, yeah, sure. This is one of the reasons why we've published a couple of books in the last few years. We call it Engineering with Nature and Atlas. in these two books we published, which you can get online on our website, we have 118 built project examples from around the world. 118. These are not theoretical projects. These are projects that are in the ground and in the water already. And they're presented in a way that it's accessible for people to kind of understand what was going on. I think the challenge, though, for organizations that built these projects going forward is to go back to them and to collect and organize the information about the value. Because it's one thing to spend money to build something. It's something different to now go back and measure what it achieved. And I think all of us can do better in that. I know my agency can do better at that. But I really think that's the opportunity that presents itself to us, is to collect this information. It's not going to be all difficult to collect, but collect what information is available and package it together as the value proposition for what was accomplished.
Great. Thank you, Todd. And I saw Heather coming in as well.
Sure. I was just going to make a comment about, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the water space that's different from, say, the climate space is we're really talking about local issues. And when you're talking about local issues, it opens you up to a different group of stakeholders collaborating together. And one of the opportunity areas that we're really exploring at Cargill, and I think could offer good opportunities to scale and create investment in these projects, is really looking across sectors. So when we look at carbon projects in our supply chain, we're very much focused on our science-based target and making sure that we're thinking about bringing in stakeholders that are also part of that supply shed. But from a water perspective, you have other opportunities where you may have a case where you could have an agricultural company partnering with an IT company that has a data server in a community looking at water issues. And so I think in some ways, water should be easier, right? If we could just think on that community level around who else is part of that watershed.
Thank you, Heather. Jan or Tamsin, any additional cases that you'd like to share?
I might just talk a little bit about some of the work that's going on in Peru, which I think has been a subject of maybe one of the earlier sessions today as well. But this is an example of a national effort in terms of policy reforms that allowed investments to be made in nature-based solutions within watersheds. So water sector reforms created a law that required drinking water utilities to allocate a portion of their user fees to watershed investments in nature-based solutions for water security, but also for climate resilience. And that pot of money really was what I was referencing in terms of the money was there, but the enabling conditions were lacking initially. But through a really kind of integrated approach that the government of Peru took to work with local communities to kind of build the science and the evidence base, to build really practical approaches for quantifying the benefits in ways that made sense to the local users and the payers in the water utilities, to really look at across the board how you prioritize areas for investment, how you estimate what the benefits are going to be, and then how you stand up the guidance and the methodologies for actually implementing those investments. But then also there's a concerted effort to do the monitoring and evaluation in a way that shares data across the watersheds where these investments are being made, so that we can learn from how the different nature-based solutions interventions are actually delivering the outcomes that we think they will, and then adjusting as we go along. So it really is building a whole system with stakeholders across different levels, with different agencies within the government working together, and then a sustainable funding source that can allow those investments to be made over time. So I think we really need to be thinking more about systems and not so much about, individual kinds of projects or even individual kind of funding streams, but really systems that bring together different sectors, different stakeholders, and really allow us to do these interventions in a landscape scale, because that's how we're really going to see the benefits and the outcomes, as opposed to just project by project.
Dan, very helpful. And Tamsin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. There's some fantastic work happening in Durban, one of our sister cities, They've been doing a whole lot of catchment management and using that as a way of improving the management of the grey infrastructure, and it's had amazing results. And I think that they worked out that it was something like for every R1 they spent, there was R3 of benefit that they were able to then accrue. And I think, going back to this question about partnerships and whatnot, I mean, that work has been leveraged off a C40 relationship, and they've got some specialists in, and they were able to do what they call not a cost-benefit analysis, a benefit-cost analysis, which was just lovely. It kind of turned it all around. And so we are slowly building up this, this basis of knowledge in South Africa, but it is still tricky. Selling it to our water colleagues who are still, I mean, as I said in the beginning, we have water resource management, which is a national competency and which is not a local government competency. So there's this massive grey area that we kind of have to navigate through, which is why it's so cool that we've been able to push these kinds of ideas through public space making rather than through the water department. And I think that's another way of approaching these is not getting too stuck in one space, So, and there are a couple of projects, a planning project that we're using, a water-sensitive planning approach too, which will have nature-based solutions embedded in them, hopefully eventually, because it is a public space network ultimately. So yeah, I'm just trying to get it through all sorts of different avenues and being creative about, well, not even creative, just not being limited by the department that you're in, and using those relationships to leverage support that we don't have, because we just don't have the technical skills really in South Africa to do that this kind of measurement just yet, but we're getting there.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing about another city in South Africa. That sounds really interesting. So just checking, Jason, Stacey, any additional cases that you all would like to share as well?
Maybe one thought to share, and it's based on something Jason was saying about making the contributions really concrete and measurable, whether it's a positive impact on water or it's carbon, or you can tell the circularity story as well, et cetera. For the first time, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, we tried to do an investor conference on ESG topics, and no one wanted to come. We actually couldn't hold it because there was no audience. This year in April, we said, let's try it again. We think things have changed. And it was fully attended and 2 full days of investor one-on-ones. There's so much interest in this topic, which means that companies are making commitments because they know they have a contribution to make. But the reality is, we don't know how we're going to get all the way there on every commitment. So riffing off of Jason's point, if with some of these projects that we all really believe in, we can help organizations based on ambitions that they have, where does it fit into their roadmap? And how does it help them get there? I think the funding conversation becomes a lot easier.
Thank you. Jason, one more opportunity for a final word on this one related to the financing and scale up. And if not, we can move to our call to action.
I don't have an example, but I do want to build on something that my colleague Greg Brill has talked about, and it again comes back to a point that Todd made about the need for ongoing monitoring and measurement. And in many of these instances, I think it'll prove out that the investment in NBS looks better and better over time. And but I don't know if anyone if in a lot of projects there's effort spent to go back in time to calculate or to continue to track those benefits that come out of it. But if the end game is to demonstrate the value for investment, then I think there's that need for the discipline to keep measuring over time to be able to see how that investment has accrued value over time as well. And that might help the scaling process.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Thanks for going with me and adding some additional flavor on that need for scale. And some really interesting insights that you all provided there in terms of, this interest, this movement for MBS that we heard a little bit from Torgny at the start, but trying to find ways to bring in those enabling conditions to support potential funding, thinking about stacking benefits from water solutions. So starting with water, but also thinking about climate, environment, biodiversity to make that business case even stronger. Thinking about local governments having an opportunity and really focusing on water as being a local challenge to drive others to bring those to the forefront, but then also, to Jan's point, thinking about a system scale, not just one specific place, one specific project, but also taking that up to a systems lens. And also combating some of that focus on a dominant focus on gray solutions, thinking about how you can bring in more of those green solutions as well. And I'm glad that we shared case studies from around the world. We heard Peru, we heard South Africa, options from the US, the book that Todd mentioned. So lots of opportunities to engage in different parts of the world and to test out some of these opportunities to scale NBS over time. So we will now move to our call to action, where we would like to hear from all of our panelists on what is really needed from stakeholders across sectors to upscale and mainstream NBS. So beginning with Heather, what is the highest priority we should address to move forward the NBS agenda by the next climate COP?
You gave me the tough question as the first speaker, but I think we've had a lot of great input today. I mean, I love all the discussion about data and how important it is to start to show the value. I'm going to cheat a little bit and say I think we need to think holistically about these place-based solutions, and it's developing the data from the start that thinks about all of the potential benefits so that we're starting to create projects and do so in a way that we're going to be able to tell that nuanced story in the end. And so between now and next year at COP, I'd like to see us putting in place frameworks that really start to understand benefits that go even beyond the environment or even beyond the soil health benefits that I was talking a little bit about from a regen ag perspective. I think it's thinking holistically about the biodiversity, the broad benefits that happen with these projects, and putting together some frameworks that we can start to commonly use to start to share the value here.
Great, thank you so much. Dan, to you, what is the highest priority we should address to move forward the NBS agenda by the next climate COP?
That's a very tough question because I think there's a lot of things that have to happen. But I guess I would just go back to this issue of really being able to be clear about what the benefits are and being able to account for outcomes of specific practices. And part of that has to do with also being very clear about how we're defining problems. So I think there actually has been, because nature-based solutions are so attractive, I think there's been a little bit of loose thinking around if we implement nature-based solutions, we'll be getting all of these benefits. But we really need to be specific, and especially in the climate space, if we're thinking about mitigation and adaptation and the contribution of nature-based solutions to resilience, what are the outcomes that we can really expect from individual types of interventions in specific places? And how do we really ramp up the science and the practice around being able to account for those benefits? Because I think if we can't tell that story clearly, we're not going to be able to really change the paradigm where nature-based solutions become mainstream thinking in our development solutions. So I would say ramping up our ability to account for benefits, and broadly speaking benefits, that are specific to individual places, because the benefits are going to be very place-based. But we can't stop and be discouraged by the fact that benefits are going to differ across different places. We need kind of overarching frameworks for how to do this benefit accounting, and then specific place-based applications. So.
Jan, Todd, you're up next. What is the highest priority we should address to move forward the NBS agenda by the next climate COP? And we'll go to Tamsin after you.
I would think developing a posture for what I'm going to call the multi-hazard world. I think the last 2 years of the pandemic has brought home to everybody on the planet that we occupy a multi-hazard world. And that means that our systems have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. and what I mean by that is that our infrastructure systems have to be able to address a spectrum of challenge. Let's say in the context of water, from drought to flood, because there are many places in the world that go from one extreme to the other in very short periods of time. But our approach to engineering in many cases have been one problem, one intervention. One problem, one intervention. But we need to address the collective challenge and opportunity. And that's a different type of engineering, I think, that has largely been undertaken by most organizations and countries of the world. So I would like to see some examples, and there are examples, I believe, around the world of this kind of multi-purpose approach to infrastructure development, and that's to include nature.
So Tamsin, highest priority we should address moving forward?
Thanks, and I'm so glad I'm following Todd because I completely agree. You've answered half of my response, so I get to focus on the other part, which is great. And that's to say that, I mean, I don't think our policy is equipped. We don't have the tools to do what we need to do. And, you know, we've ended up in this place because we are managing water as a thing that we need to use rather than managing nature, and water is an outcome of that. So, you know, if we have healthy environments, we'll have healthy water outcomes. So, I mean, I think we need to be looking at creating the tool that we need, which gives us that flexibility, that gives us adaptability, you know, gives us that opportunity for adaptive management. And building on this connection back into COVID, I mean, this is now the time, if you ask me, because, well, you have asked me, because, you know, COVID has really focused everyone's minds on our cities and how we make our cities and the importance of nature and of healthy cities and, you know, healthy urban places and whatnot. And there's no better way of building healthy cities than using nature-based solutions. So, I mean, I think we have an opportunity, and the window is probably quite small, to leverage all these ideas in and start to mainstream them into the policy and create that tool. And I think also from an economic recovery perspective, in South Africa, nature-based solutions kind of equates to green infrastructure, which equates to alien clearing and catchment management. It's not necessarily the correct equation, but it's a really, really, really great way of using unskilled people and stimulating the economy in a way that it wouldn't be able to otherwise. So I think for, you know, countries like South Africa and other developing and kind of partially developed countries, nature-based solutions offers an amazing opportunity for creating jobs and recovery from COVID, apart from this opportunity to create, you know, the healthy cities that we hope we're going to create and hand over to our children and grandchildren and whatnot. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Jason, over to you in Glasgow. What's the highest priority we should address to move forward the NBS agenda by the next COP?
My view is that the leaders need to step up with action rather than commitment at this next stage. If you look at the news coverage of COP and the disillusionment publicly, it's because of the disconnect between our political and economic leaders making long-term, big, ambitious commitments, and then the next stage of actually operationalizing against those commitments in the real world. And if leading entities, whether they be public sector or private sector, really ramp up what they're investing in the real world, that will have a catalytic effect on getting others to move. And it's demonstrating the leadership, not through a long-term commitment, but actually doing the work. That's what's needed.
Great. Okay, the final word to Stacy. What's the highest priority we should address to move forward the NBS agenda by the next climate COP?
Yeah, this point really resonates with me. And actually this morning I was thinking about it because the first grown-up job I ever had was at a company founded by Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison told us the genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, which means let's get it done. Let's stop talking, let's get it done. So that really resonates with me too. The other thing I would say is, and Heather talked a lot about this, I'm thinking a lot about agriculture, and I'm thinking about agriculture for business reasons, but also because of all those farmer families who need to become more resilient to the point about all of these complexities that we have to navigate now, too much water, not enough water. And I'm thinking a lot about how we can help advance and scale sustainable farming and agricultural practices, because we know what to do. We just need to help each other get there and protect the livelihoods of all those farmers.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacey, and thank you all. Lots to think about in terms of highest priorities going forward. The COVID recovery, opportunities for creating jobs there, thinking about agriculture as a key sector to engage, thinking about benefit accounting. What are those outcomes and specific practices in specific places so that we have information available and being clear on what those benefits are. So I think lots of places that we can focus our efforts, and we'll continue to work across all of these organizations who have partnered here, who are working on these sorts of benefit accounting questions, trying to continue to build that business case for NBS by the next climate COP and see where we get to, and maybe we can have another conversation and see how we can reflect on what we've heard. So I'll now move to beginning to close our session. Just first to thank all of our panelists for your amazing contributions and just giving a bit of a summary of what we heard for everyone here. So at the start, we heard from Torgny about the new movement for NBS, the importance of funding, the need for new research and new knowledge, the opportunity to prioritize solutions that combine mitigation and adaptation, a lot of which are nature-based solutions, creating holistic solutions and new governance structures. So I think our panelists actually talked and touched on a lot of these issues that Torgny raised in the scene setting presentation in their responses from the different sectors. We then looked at how different sectors have different roles and responsibilities in furthering the NBS agenda. So for the private sector, hearing about this dependence on water resources, incentives to invest, and the catalytic role that companies can play oftentimes in bringing different entities together. We heard from the public sector, thinking about combining traditional engineering with nature, opportunities to really take these to scale in the areas that they're managing, but having to shift that view of water resources to think about them as ecological infrastructure. And then from the NGO sector, playing a convening role, supporting with tools and evidence, and then also ensuring the integrity of NBS as well. We then moved into discussion about how to scale up investments in NBS. So thinking about the opportunity out there, this new movement for NBS that has come in, interest in investments, but really needing to find opportunities locally and also having a supporting, enabling environment to make sure that that funding could be delivered in the right places. Thinking about getting the people who have been involved in these to really share those successes, to document those best cases, to think about how we can share local examples, but also scale those up to a system scale as well. So thinking about opportunities for business cases, we heard some more examples from different places, including Cape Town, Durban, 118 examples from the US Army Corps of Engineers, Peru from Forest Trends, thinking about some of the work that Cargill and Heineken have done in specific places, like we heard Indonesia mention, some of the soil health work that Cargill is undertaking. So lots of case studies to look to where there are opportunities for scale. And then also work that the UN Global Compact CEO Water Mandate has spearheaded with companies, the Nature Conservancy and others, where we have a number of case studies of nature-based solutions and are going to be continuing an effort to really build that business case, developing tools and resources on forecasting, that time scale that Jason mentioned, as well as valuation of nature-based solutions going forward, so that we have that information readily available on how you can finance these nature-based solutions and what that cost comparison might be. I think Tamsin mentioned something like a 1 to 9 or 2 to 9 differential between nature-based solutions and gray solutions, so making sure that we have those cases on hand. So lots of opportunities to talk through and to share, and so thank you again for your contributions. So to all of you here, we hope that you've learned more about the linkages between water and climate and how NBS are really one tool in the toolkit that can help to move us forward. And we believe that revolutionizing the way that we use, store, distribute, and treat the world's finite amount of fresh water and investing in nature-based solutions that can support mitigation and adaptation is key to reaching our climate goals. This session has shown that everyone, including governments, corporations, NGOs, and individuals, have a role to play in building a just, water-resilient future. And by working together across sectors, we can do more to scale up NBS to solve our challenges. And now is the time for us to do this. We've heard a lot about urgency this week, so really finding ways that we can act on this now. So thank you all very much for your participation in this session. Thank you to our hosts, the Nature Conservancy, Pacific Institute, and the CEO Water Mandate. Thank you to our participants from CIWI, Heineken, City of Cape Town, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Forest Trends, and Cargill for this session. And I will now hand it off to Maria Anna in Glasgow at the Pavilion to close us all out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naabia, and thank you, everyone. This has been such a journey today, so I'm very happy to have had you for all day. I hope that you continue to follow the NBS discussions that are happening throughout the COP, but also in many pavilions for the rest of the time here. And thank you so much for the participants online and here for joining us. Thank you and good night.